Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out The Story of Good Vibrations is Weirder Than You Thought.
Good Vibrations was probably the most complex song ever recorded.
The situation with Good Vibrations, it didn't make me laugh. It made me cry.
It was a work of genius, Brian Wilson cutting up to 90 hours of tape. The first song ever created using copy and paste.
We weren't even going to release it because it was so bizarre.
But it was also a nightmare to create, and that was because Brian had found this new way of recording. In 1966...
hang on. Y'all be sure to go to David Hartley and like and subscribe. All I know about Good Vibrations, what stands out in my mind is that there's this little organ that sounds like a theremin, and everybody thinks it's a theremin, but it's not a theremin? Maybe it is a theremin. I just heard some background music that didn't sound like the final recording. I don't know what happened. 90 hours of tape? Copy and paste back then? I don't know.
And that was because Brian had found this new way of recording. In 1966, songwriting methods and recording techniques were rapidly changing, and the Beach Boys, thanks to their leader Brian Wilson, were experimenting more than anyone. Bands were no longer going into the studio to record a whole song in a single take, but were now exploring advanced recording methods to create far more experimental music. Although most of Pet Sounds still employed this method of recording the whole instrumental track in one go, and then recording overdubs and vocals, Brian was beginning to explore a new modular way of recording. Okay. For this, he would bring in a small fragment of an idea into the studio, record that, and then later on record some other ideas. And if he liked any of those ideas, he would literally cut the tape and merge them together into one song.
Wow. That seems like a nightmare. Wow. Y'all, I started audio engineering when tape was still the media of choice. Pro Tools had been invented, but in the big studios, 2-inch tape was still the main thing. Pro Tools was an extra expense. You had to rent a Pro Tools rig. Most studios didn't have Pro Tools, so it was either analog tape or like a 48-track digital tape. That was kind of common too. And then you would sync those up sometimes with time code. So yeah, I've seen footage of Brian Wilson directing a bunch of musicians in one room, usually a studio called Gold Star, which is now the parking lot of a Starbucks. And they would all be in one room, and he'd tell everybody what to play, and they'd rehearse it a bunch and do a bunch of takes and make little changes and then overdub vocals. But it looks like he's getting into a whole other method. Interesting. Let's see.
He would literally cut the tape and merge them together into one song.
Oh yeah. Oh, I also wanted to say, like, once you cut that tape, it's kind of... That's the cut. You can get little shavings, tape them back in there, but, like, you measure 10 times and then cut once, right?
Brian said, "I had a lot of unfinished ideas, fragments of music I called feels. Each feel represented a mood or emotion I'd felt, and I planned to fit them together like a mosaic." This allowed for some incredible creativity in both songwriting and recording, but as Brian would soon find out, it's easy to run into difficulty. And so the song Good Vibrations started out as just another idea for the Pet Sounds album.
I'm thinking of tempo, like maintaining a tempo. I guess he wasn't that concerned if the time changed. You know, songs do that sometimes, but back then they didn't have, they had metronomes, but it was rare to play to a click track, you know?
All he had was this idea for the opening section with the verse and chorus, but even in these early takes, we can start to hear it take shape. It's relatively simple as a piece of music, but it has this beautiful dreamlike sounding organ and this really unique melodic bass line.
He definitely
played by Carol Kay. That's her right there.
wrote out some neat lines on the bass, like for instance, I'd have never played that.
He also had the idea for the chorus and was starting to experiment with different sounds, such as the theremin. It's not actually a theremin. A normal theremin would have been too difficult to play at exactly the right pitch. So they used an adaptation called the electro-theremin, which sounds the same, but it uses a standard piano keyboard to make it easier to play in pitch.
Okay.
You can also hear how he was starting to record in different sections. This recording starts at the point of the chorus. 1, 2. So Brian is experimenting with these different parts of the song, and things are going great. And although he hasn't finished writing the song or come up with any lyrics, it doesn't really matter because this new modular way of recording means he could cut and paste all these different sections later on and then fit them together. He brought the idea to his writing partner Tony Asher and told him about this idea he had based on a memory from when he was a child.
How do they keep the tempo consistent? Is the drummer just that good? I think the drummer is Hal Blaine. He was usually the drummer in the Wrecking Crew. I think there were a couple other guys, but he played a lot of Beach Boys stuff. I know that. Huh.
When I was around, 10, 12 years old, my mom and I were walking to the market one day, and a dog started barking at us. And I went, Mom, why is that dog barking at us? She goes, son, because some dogs pick up vibrations from people, and when they pick up bad vibrations, they bark. And so I said, well, what about good vibrations? She said, well, sometimes they pick up good vibrations.
Brian and Tony worked together on lyrics for the song, which they recorded for these early takes. So at this point, the plan was that Good Vibrations would be the upcoming single from Pet Sounds, but it wasn't finished. And with the label asking for a single, Brian directed his focus towards finishing the rest of the Pet Sounds album.
I've never noticed that vocal line in there before like that. I guess it's in the final version, but it's masked by the harmonies. Let's hear it again. Some very impressive jumps in there in that vocal. Wow.
So at this point, the plan was that Good Vibrations would be the upcoming single from Pet Sounds, but it wasn't finished. And with the label asking for a single, Brian directed his focus towards finishing the rest of the Pet Sounds album. And so now he's unsure what to do with Good Vibrations and still unhappy with what he has. So he showed the song to fellow Beach Boy Mike Love.
And I told him I had a song that goes bom, boom, bom, bom, boom, bom, bom, bom. And I went, you know what, Mike? I would like to call it Good Vibrations. He goes, how's this? I'm picking up good vibrations.
With just 3 weeks left before Pet Sounds was due to be completed, Brian attempted to record...
Hang on. Did Mike know about Brian's mom telling him about dogs picking up good vibrations?
With just 3 weeks left before Pet Sounds was due to be completed, Brian attempted to record Good Vibrations again from scratch. But this didn't satisfy him either. And now he was starting to accumulate many different versions of many different sections and was starting to chop and change all these sections together depending on which take he preferred.
Oh, gosh.
The 3 weeks came and went, and much to the disappointment of everyone, Pet Sounds was completed without Good Vibrations. It was becoming clear that whilst this modular way of recording facilitated Brian's wild imagination, there was something that made it almost impossible to finish. But just before that, let me tell you about the sponsor of this video, CyberGhost VPN.
Yo, be sure to go to CyberGhost and buy a ghost and some cyber. I have wondered why it's not on Pet Sounds.
Good Vibrations was starting to take on a life of its own. But the problem with this modular recording is that it's like making music with your imagination because the music is all in your head. The downside was that the only place the music existed was within Brian's mind. There was no demo recording, no sheet music, no performance the band could run through.
Right.
No one had heard or even knew what the final song would sound like. There were just these fragments of music existing within Brian's mind. And unfortunately, Brian's mental state was starting to decline. It started with a difficult childhood. Brian was often beaten by his father, including one incident where he was hit in the head, leaving him deaf in one ear, which is why Brian mixed in mono rather than stereo. And this difficult relationship continued into their adult life. Their father Murray was also their manager in their early days, and you can hear from some recordings what he was like to work with.
I've protected you for 22 years, but I can't go on if you're not going to listen to an intelligent man. If you want to fight for success, I'll go all out.
No, I don't. We don't do that.
You think you got it made?
No, we don't.
Son?
We would like to record under an atmosphere of calmness, and you're not presenting that.
Brian took over production.
I'm so thankful for the father that I have, or had. He's passed away. I still have him. Right there. He's still there. Is he behind me?
Production in the mid-60s, but this also coincided with
Presenting that.
Brian took over production in the mid-60s, but this also coincided with the time he began experimenting with psychedelic drugs, something Brian attributes to his increased creativity, but also something that led to serious mental health problems.
Well, the LSD makes you feel a little bit fearful, you know, and very aware of your surroundings, you know. But after a while, when it wears off, when you go to the piano, man, those fingers glide along those keys like you wouldn't believe, you know.
Really?
Did you feel that you went too far with drugs because of that?
Yeah, and I wish I hadn't. I regret having taken drugs.
And finally was the reception to Pet Sounds, which received a mixed response. It confused a lot of their fans and didn't sell as well as they'd hoped, and even some of the other members of the Beach Boys were unsure about Brian's new direction.
It's a masterpiece, isn't it? A masterpiece.
But elsewhere, Brian was beginning to receive a lot of praise for his inventiveness, especially in the UK, thanks in part to the Beatles.
Beach Boys, I think, was a big influence on the harmony. And that was Pet Sounds, which I loved. It was like still one of my big albums, you know. It was so atmospheric and different.
Yes.
And yet it was the Beach Boys still, you know.
Yeah.
And we heard Pet Sounds and thought, right, we've got to do something better than that.
Despite Brian's serious mental health challenges and the pressure to deliver a commercial success, his vision for a new musical direction was beginning to cut through, and often saw him labelled as a genius. And thankfully, as well as the Beatles, there were also those around him which were encouraging in their belief that Brian was really onto something with this modular way of recording. And so...
Yeah, I mean, wow. I don't think he made Pet Sounds with the modular recording, did he? I don't think he did, but yeah, like, just listen to the music, even if it didn't sell well. I feel like you can listen to it and see that it is brilliant and really high quality, right?
And thankfully, as well as the Beatles, there were also those around him which were encouraging in their belief that Brian was really onto something with this modular way of recording. And so, after abandoning it for 9 weeks, he returned back to Good Vibrations, intent on finishing it. Brian returned to the studio. More modules were recorded, some of these already existing sections, some new ones, and some new ideas which would never even make it into the final song.
On Good Vibrations, we would go from one studio to another because they had the instruments that I needed at those studios. So we'd go to the studio, use the piano, thanks guys, we're done. Take the tapes over to RCA, put the cello on,
Oh my God.
get the theremin on, take the tapes over, get the bass over at Western, the bass sound I like, and then put the tambourine on it at CBS.
Wow.
And you've got Good Vibration.
Wow. That's gotta be expensive. Well, I mean, maybe not. We're just going for a day to record a tambourine, though. I mean, you probably just need an hour, a couple hours. Wow. That's very modular.
And then put the tambourine on it at CBS, and you've got Good Vibration.
Dozens of different overdubs and vocal takes were recorded, trying to get this perfect sound. The musicians having no idea what they were working on because Brian was trying to piece together all these ideas within his own imagination.
You start off with a blank piece of paper and then wait for Brian to come around.
And we continued. Every time we'd go in, sometimes we'd work for hours and hours and hours just to get the feel of this doom, doom. And we never knew what the heck we were doing.
Brian would then literally cut all these different tapes and splice them together. Over 90 hours of tape were used, and no part of the song was actually recorded all the way through. In fact, some of the verses and different parts are copied and pasted, literally identical. In order to disguise the cuts, he used a long reverb between these sections, like you can hear in this transition. Finally, after months of work, Brian completed the final mix. And at over 3.5 minutes long, the label were reluctant to release it because of the...
Hang on, what did that say? Oh, okay. The verses were recorded on February 17th at Gold Star. Course 1 and 2, Western. Okay, the rest of it was recorded at Western. Wow. February, June, May, September, June. Oh my God. Wow. Hilarious.
the final mix. And at over 3.5 minutes long, the label were reluctant to release it because of the 3-minute limit set by many radio stations.
Oh, that's
But
nothing
it was
now, right?
not only a commercial success, but an incredibly important moment in pop music history.
What do you miss most about the 60s?
I mostly miss the joy of running in the studio and recording a #1 record kind of feeling, you know?
Did you know when it was going to be #1? Did you?
Oh, yeah. I knew.
Brian's love of the creative process is so inspirational, and I really believe this love and care that he put into his work can be used in everything we do, and it's something I aspire to do with these videos. So thank you so much for watching, and Brian, if by some miracle you're watching, thank you for such beautiful music. Don't forget to click the link in the description to get a special discount with CyberGhost VPN. This application will protect your data while you browse and give you full access to all blocked content on the internet for just over $2 a month. Totally risk-free, so check it out. Link in the description.
Y'all be sure to go to David Hartley and like and subscribe. That was inspiring. I still would like to know how they kept the tempo consistent. Maybe the drummer had a metronome next to his drum set or something, and he just referenced it before they counted off. Or maybe Brian did. Maybe it sounded like Brian counted it off. Wow. Wow, that's so much work. They show up at the studio, and Brian says, "Okay, guys, we're recording verse 2 today of Good Vibrations. That's what we're doing today. Verse 2. Okay. How's it go? It goes, dun, 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 dun. Oh no, that's the intro. I don't remember how the verses go. But wow. It's all in Brian's brain. Fascinating. What a talent. I envy him. Well, I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.